All right, everybody, how's it going? Big Cop Diesel coming at you. I believe this is my first live on YouTube. So, first things first, I'm new to the live thing. As I'm thinking about it now, I should have probably done this with my phone because the camera on this laptop sucks, but it is what it is. This is just a trial run. Just going to play around with this a little bit to work the bugs out, get the kinks out, and yeah, just see what happens. I'm not really expecting anybody to jump on here, but I do a live on my private Facebook page from time to time. Again, no expectation that anybody's actually going to jump on while it's live, but the benefit is that I can do this while I'm thinking about it, and then it'll just live on the internet. Now on Facebook, when I do the private one or the videos in my private Facebook group, I know that those um, last only 30 days, whereas here, I'm not sure how long they last. But, anyways, again, the whole purpose in this is really more than anything kind of to work out the bugs. But I did want to talk about why security guards need training. And I want to preface this with in Michigan, for those of you that don't know, you are not required to have what is known as a guard card. There's a lot of other states out there that require a guard card for security officers to be able to even step on a job site. In Michigan, the way the law is written, we can work under the license of the company that we're working for. And there's some pros and cons to that. The pro to that is that as a security guard, you can work for more than one company as a contractor, because usually, not always, but in some instances, those guard cards that I mentioned, depending on the state you live in, has to be attached to a company. So, for instance, in Washington State, your guard card, when I say attached, I guess it's more along the lines that a company basically sponsors you. Um, so your guard card's attached to that company, and then if you leave and go to another company, your guard card will be detached from the first company and then attached to the second company. And then in California, you don't have to have that same setup, but you do have to have a guard card. And those cards are um, run by the states. Those states track guard cards, track the training and everything, so that they can make sure that your guard card is up to date. And then anybody, even now as a civilian, or I shouldn't say civilian, but as somebody that's not working in the security industry in those states, I can go on those states' websites and see the status of anybody's guard card. So, for instance, my guard card is on both of those sites, in Washington State and in California. So in Michigan, we have the luxury of not having to have a guard card. So again, the pro to that is you can work for more than one security contractor or company at a time. But let's talk about the cons to that. What are the things that are no good about that? Well, that would be that you're not required to have any training. Um, there is no standardized training. Um, there's really nothing. You just basically have to be 21 years old, have no felonies, and you can work unarmed security. And then for armed security, a lot of times companies are just looking for somebody that is 21 years of age, no felonies, and has a concealed pistol license. And then a lot of times they'll add in, 1 year of customer service experience uh, as a minimum. So basically, you can get your CPL, be a door greeter somewhere for a year, and then go apply for an armed position at a security company. Now, the other end of that, when it comes to job postings in Michigan and really a lot of other places, is they will say, prefer ex-U.S. military and or law enforcement. And the reason why the companies are doing that is because they obviously want to get the highest tier applicant that they can. So obviously, if you're somebody that was a police officer or in the military, you've had some basic firearms training. You've gone to the range. You've had to qualify according to the standards of the organization that you belong to. Um, and then some companies go way out in left field and they specify that you have to be special forces and all this kind of stuff, which is ridiculous because nobody with that skill set is even going to be perusing that job page on Indeed. It's just not going to happen. So, with that said, um, again, in Michigan, you're not required to have any training, but why should you get training? Well, the reason why you should get training is a couple. Excuse me. First and foremost, as an individual, especially if you want to become uh, good at your job, you should always be seeking to learn more. Now, again, with most security guard jobs, I have to say probably 80, maybe even 90% of the security jobs out there, they're going to put you through the bare minimum training, meaning you might have to do some online videos for CPR, which is not very good, but sometimes they can get away with that. And they may have a video series or something you have to do about patrolling and report writing and all that. All that is good training, because again, some training is better than none. But what I want to say is, don't rely on the company to provide all the training that you need to be successful. In fact, I would venture to say that if you are only going to rely on the training that you're going to get from your security company, you're being rather short sighted, right? I want you to think long term. I want you to think, the job after this one, should you decide to stay in the security field, because the job you're working right now may not be the job that you work down the road. In fact, depending on what you're doing as far as security, your pay, your benefits, you should always be looking for bigger and better. Now, for a lot of people, security is the stepping stone into law enforcement. And ironically, security is also a job that a lot of ex police officers get into when they retire or they leave the force. So, having said that, you should always be striving to learn more to become better at your job. The other thing is that it improves you as a person, right? It helps. There's pride in learning something and learning a new skill and being able to apply that skill. But it also shows other people, namely employers, that you take your job seriously and that you do consider yourself a professional. When you do training as well, the other things that happen is you train with other people. If you go to a security related class or even a firearms class, you're going to be in class with people from other security companies and maybe even other agencies, to include law enforcement. So what happens then is you begin to be able to build out a network so that down the road you can reach out to these folks that you went through training with, and it could be for advice, it could be for direction and training, it could be for possible job opportunities. Okay, so don't be short-sighted when it comes to security. You want to make sure you're thinking down the road a little bit. Now, when it comes to training, well, what kind of training should you get? A minute ago, mentioned that some security companies will allow uh, applicants to get away with an online CPR course, which I don't even understand how that works. But if that's you, if the company you're with said, "Hey, we're going to give you a link to this online, CPR course that's not hands-on, but we'll accept it." Okay, you've done the bare minimum to be accepted for that job. But I got to tell you, most agencies worth their salt are not going to accept that kind of certification. They want a hands-on, practical certification, meaning, yes, there's some slides that you got to watch, there's some lecture going on, but you're also getting hands-on, performing the repetitions with the breaths and the compressions, and working with another person to do that as well. Um, the other thing is when it comes to report writing now, I know that everybody's on their phones now, and That's kind of the most convenient way if you're taking notes at all. But I got to tell you guys that, hold on one second. I got to tell you guys that you want to have a notebook, okay? This is one that I just made. I purchased these offline and just threw a sticker on it just because I give these out in my classes. But guys, you should always have a notebook and you should always have a pen as part of your uniform. And if you don't know what kind of notes to take, what to write down, I'm going to tell you there's two things that you're going to always want to keep track of. Any unusual incidents on your patrol, on your tour, depending on the company, on your shift, and you're also going to record any incidents, right? So what I mean by unusual, so let's say your job is to patrol a parking lot. Let's say you're working midnight shift and you're just in an empty parking lot, keeping an eye on the building and the parking lot. And every hour you have to walk the premises to make sure that the gates are locked. There's no holes in the fence. There's nobody attempting to get onto the property. Nobody stealing anything, and nobody spraying graffiti. I guess I don't even know if people still do that. And so every hour you patrol around. You have your flashlight. You're checking the fence. And you're also just trying to notice any other thing. Are there any lights in the parking lot that are out? Light bulbs that are out, or is there an area around the building that's particularly dark? So you do your patrol, and for your own notes, you can write the time, the date, the time. So let's say you start at 10 o'clock, 2200. You're going to do your pass down if there is a pass down. So you're going to write who you relieved. I relieved Joe Schmo. He said nothing to report, or if there's keys to hand off or anything like that, you're going to put you received your gear from Joe Schmo. And then every hour on the hour, you're going to do your patrol. So you do your patrol, maybe at 2300 or 11 o'clock, you do your patrol. There's nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to report. So you can write NTR. But let's say that when you do your midnight patrol, you now notice that it appears that somebody cut a hole in the fence, or maybe there was a door open that wasn't open before. So you're going to inspect, and let's say that the guy you relieved forgot to tell you that somebody was working late. They left the building, left the door open, and have left the premises. So once you clear the building to make sure there's nobody in there, you're going to lock the door. You're probably going to call the project manager or the point of contact. Well, that's an incident. That's not an incident, but that's an out of the ordinary report. So for your midnight entry in your notebook, you're just going to put that down. What happened? Who you notified, what your instructions were. And then after that, let's say all the rest of your tours or your patrols were normal, so you just go back to writing NTR, nothing to report. Well, why is this important? This is important because, and the other thing I want to mention is once you fill this notebook up, you don't throw it away, you file it. You get you a banker's box or a filing cabinet, and you keep all of your notebooks. I was a corrections officer for 12 years. I kept every single notebook. We had these little pocket calendars. So I recorded where I worked when I was bouncing around, when I was, didn't have a home, what unit I worked that day, or what assignment I worked. Same thing. If nothing happened that day, cool. If I had to break up a fight, that went in there. Now, if there's an incident, meaning there's something serious that happened, like a theft or a fight or anything where you had to call the police or you had to call first responders, and then very simply, that's a format that we use is who, what, when, where, and if you know why something happened, right? And if the company you work for doesn't have a form built out for that, or an incident report form, again, I know a lot of companies are doing things online now. You should still keep your own notes, because this is your property, and these are to help you recall what you did, what you heard, what you said, why you did what you did. Because 4 years from now, when you have completely forgotten about this incident, you might get a letter in the mail saying you're on behalf of the company or the other person, right? And so the last thing you want to do is go to this court hearing and say something like, "Well, I don't know, I don't remember, maybe." Now you look like an idiot, look like a fool, right? Now you've taken the status of presenting yourself as a professional and downgraded yourself to looking like a buffoon, right? So if you ever get subpoenaed to court, you know, you know, either you're going to get it in the mail, or the attorney for your security company, whether you're still working there or not, they're going to reach out to you and say, "Hey, just so you know, there's a lawsuit or a hearing coming down. You were working on that day, and this has to do with the break-in that happened on whatever day." Well, you're not going to remember all the details. You're not going to remember that. So that's where you go into your banker's box or your filing cabinet and you pull out your notebook that maybe was for that month of that year. This is pretty thin. So this might be a month, maybe 2 months worth, as long as there's not a bunch of entries. But you pull that notebook out and you look at it and you remind yourself, "Oh yeah, I remember this is what happened." And then you can have this, I Xerox the appropriate pages so that when you do have to go in and talk to a lawyer and give a deposition, you can give them that, and then they will help you answer the questions. So that's one of the things you want to learn about is report writing. Okay, you want to be able to write a report. Now, if you're somebody that struggles with spelling, maybe you're not the best writer. I got a news flash for you. Most jobs that you have, you're going to have to be able to read and write. If that's something you struggle with, guys, there are so many apps like being ignorant, meaning not knowing something, is really no longer an excuse in this day and age. Everybody's literally walking around with a $1,500 computer, and you literally have all the knowledge of the world at your fingertips, right? These are way more than looking up your favorite video. Maybe you like guns, maybe you like to cook, maybe you like to, whatever your hobby is. You most certainly have been on this phone, on YouTube or wherever else, looking up things that interest you. So why not use the same device to look up things that can help you, right? So if you struggle with spelling or you struggle with writing, I guarantee you there's an app or a website, probably for free, that will help you do that. So if this is something you struggle with, this is where you got to look into yourself and say, "Hey man, yeah, that public education I got sucked, and I need to be able to be more proficient at writing and being able to read and being able to speak." There's a lot of places out there, a lot of resources for you, because even if security is not the thing you're going to be doing for the rest of your life, this is obviously a skill that you can take with you anywhere, whether you leave security and become, a salesperson, or whatever the next step for you is going to be. But especially if you are going to go into law enforcement, you are going to go to a police academy somewhere or a corrections academy. Those agencies, we document everything, and that's, I learned a lot of lessons from the Department of Corrections, but one of the main ones was to document everything, because if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. So that's enough on that skill. So what are some of the other skills? Well, another big skill is learning the law as it pertains to what you're doing as a security officer. A lot of times, people, especially new security guards, make the mistake of thinking that security work and police work are the same thing. They are nothing alike. They are two completely different occupations. Now, there's some things that kind of mirror each other, but they are not the same. If you are a police officer, you are not an expert in security. I'm sorry, that's not what you're doing. You're out on road patrol. You're stopping people for violating the law, traffic laws, or maybe you got, a description of a vehicle that's fleeing from a crime. But when it comes to traditional security, the only thing I can think that's even close to that, and if you're a police officer on here, please feel free to chime in. is maybe if you get a call of a break-in at a business in the middle of the night, and you're going to go and you're going to clear the building and make sure that nobody's in there and you're going to lock it up, right? That's really it. And when it comes to security work, we're not police officers. Our job is not to enforce the law. Our job is to meet the criteria of the contract that we're working on. And all the authority that we have as security comes from that contract, which is basically what the owner of the business or the company wants us to do. Again, there's some similarities, but they're nothing alike. Um, as security guards, we don't have the ability to be able to just search people. Probable cause is not a thing, um, unless you're doing PA 330, which is a whole different discussion. And if you understand what that is, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it because it's not really relevant for what we're talking about now. But they're two totally different occupations, so it's important that you understand what the law says about what we can and what we cannot do. And where a lot of security officers get themselves in trouble is around this little amendment in the Constitution called the Fourth Amendment. And what the Fourth Amendment states is that we as citizens have the right against unreasonable search and seizure. That means that this is not 1930s Germany where you're walking down the street and the Gestapo can just come up to you and say, papers, please, and you have to produce your papers and empty your pockets. And that doesn't happen here. And so be very careful about that. So that's more training that you could benefit from, which is legal training, so that you don't get yourself into trouble. And then I am going to throw in another tag along with that, and that's on the subject of handcuffs. Generally speaking, as a security officer, most companies are not even going to issue you handcuffs, so that's not anything you have to worry about. So if you're working a security detail right now and the job did not issue you handcuffs, that means that they don't intend for you to be able to detain anyone, and that's okay. That just means if there's something happens where somebody needs to be detained, you're on the phone calling the police. Now, if you are on a job site and the requirement for that site is for you to carry and use handcuffs, again, you got to make sure you don't get yourself jammed up with a Fourth Amendment violation and open you and yourself up to liability basically for being sued. So if you've been issued handcuffs and it is the expectation that you do detain people, which sometimes happens on some of these retail jobs where people are shoplifting, although I would still stay. That's I'll talk about that in a minute. I would stay away from that anyway. But if you do find yourself in a situation where you are carrying handcuffs and you have determined that you need to detain someone, remember that that's what that is. Now, having said that, if you know that you're about to handcuff somebody, the police should already be on the way. You should have already called 911, say, hey, I'm a security officer at, ABC business. We just had somebody beat somebody up, or somebody um, was, fighting, somebody assaulted somebody, and you were able to detain that person. So the cops are already on the way. You've handcuffed this person, and the only thing you can do is pat down their waistline to make sure that there's nothing accessible that they could hurt you with. And that's all you're doing. And you're waiting for the cops to come. Now, if the cops come and they do a preliminary investigation, they talk to you, they talk to any witnesses, they talk to the person, and let's say that the police just decide that it's not something serious enough that they're going to take them downtown and book them, that's fine. You let them take the person out of handcuffs, give them a brow beating, and send them on the way, and then they hand you back your cuffs. You will never, ever, 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 ever place handcuffs on someone for the purpose of browbeating them or reading them the riot act and then removing the handcuffs and sending them on their way. Because at that point, you're opening yourself up for a Fourth Amendment violation. So again, if you do have to detain someone, obviously refer to your company's policies and procedures. and your company's use of force policy to make sure you understand it thoroughly, because applying handcuffs is a use of force. Okay. So just make sure you're clear on all that. Okay. Some of the other things that you want to know and should strive to get training on is de escalation. All right. Obviously, there's going to be situations and times where de escalation is not possible. If there is an active assault going on, whether it's a deadly force assault or not, there de-escalation time has already passed. You're going to have to deal with it. You know, there is no de-escalating once there's an assault in progress, deadly or otherwise. But if someone has tempers are flaring, you're at a business and there's a customer who's upset about whatever, or maybe you're at a business and you have two employees who are going at it. De-escalation is an invaluable skill because it, in the long run, hopefully will prevent an escalation of violence, right? Being able to talk to people and give them an ear to listen to, and use active listening, and being able to show them that you are paying attention to them, saying back to them what they said to you so that they know that you are listening to them, can go a long way. Because a lot of times when people are upset, it's because they feel like nobody's listening to them, or the person that they're trying to communicate with just isn't hearing them. Now, there are times where somebody will not de escalate, even if violence hasn't occurred yet. And that's if you can make contact with them. And what I mean by contact is meaning you're speaking to them, they can hear and understand what you're saying. So, what are some instances where you wouldn't be able to make contact with them? Well, if they are impaired, if they're deaf, and they cannot read lips, that would be one instance that you cannot make contact with them. If they are high or drunk or mentally ill, these are all things that are barriers to being able to make contact with the person so they can understand what it is you're trying to do. And at the end of the day, if the person doesn't want to be de-escalated, we can't force de-escalation on them. We're simply walking them down the path and making them think that it's their own decision to de-escalate. But at the end of the day, if they don't want to de-escalate, there's nothing you can do about that. But having the skills to be able to recognize where you're at on that stair step, there's a stair step process that starts with empathizing with someone, making contact if you can make contact, empathizing with them, and so on. So these are the things you learn when it comes to de-escalation, and being able to put that on a resume is huge, because all business owners, they want security people that will be able to de-escalate. As a business owner, I don't need I don't need a soldier standing there at attention, full battle rattle, ready to take an objective, right? I just need somebody there that can keep my employees and my customers safe. And a lot of times that's going to be just using your mouth, not handcuffs, not going hands on, just being able to de-escalate the situation. So, and all the things I'm talking to you about, there's certifications for these things, and that's what you want to be able to show is I'm certified in this. That makes you more attractive to employers when you're sitting in front of a hiring manager, and they're going to ask you inevitably, why should we hire you? And wouldn't it be nice to be able to say, you should hire me because I take my job very seriously. I am a professional. And then this is where you hand them copies of your certificate saying, yes, I'm certified in de-escalation. Yes, I'm certified in CPR first aid. Yes, I'm certified in whatever. That's going to immediately make you more attractive than the person who just comes in, who may, interview well. But in my mind, I'm thinking dollar signs, right? If I have to train you in some stuff, I'm going to have to pay for that. If you come in the door already trained, I can check that off. I can check that box off. Well, I don't have to spend $150 to get them CPR certified. I don't have to spend whatever the cost is of de-escalation training. So hopefully this makes sense to you guys. And then when it comes to training that may or may not be acceptable to an employer, meaning that's not what they're looking for. But one thing, again, depends on the job site, is defensive tactics. I was just out in California training a security team on some of these things, and one of which was defensive tactics. If you're going to be working a job site where it's a high likelihood that you are going to go hands on, you need to have some sort of defensive tactics training or some sort of combatives training. Now, whether you on your own, let's say you like to box, maybe you boxed as a young person in school or in college or in the military, and now you just box for fun, or maybe you take jujitsu, you want to have some sort of combatives training in your back pocket. Now, there's a slice to that. The other part of that is if the company does put you through combatives training, whatever that system is, you have to use that system. If you go outside of that scope, you are opening yourself and the company up to liability. Now, having said that, if the company doesn't require you to have the training and therefore does not provide it, you got to go for what you know. And if you use the skills that you have to end a situation to keep people safe, a lot of times people are not going to have any heartburn with it. However, I would recommend that you have some sort of insurance to cover you, some professional liability insurance, just for that reason. Don't assume because you work for a company that they're going to back you up in court. So just be aware of that. Um, so the other side of that, or what goes along with that too, is when it comes to working security, especially if you want to climb the ladder, if you want to get into the higher end security, or you even thinking about getting to executive protection, you need to have some sort of combatives training. Because as an executive protection agent, anything you do is going to go hands on 999 times out of 1,000 before you can even think about pulling a firearm out. And the reason is executive protection is it's a whole other thing, but the very basis of that job is the planning. When you see the celebrities and the high rollers and they got their security team with them and everybody's walking around with earpieces and stuff, you're seeing the very tip of that iceberg. You're only seeing that tip of that iceberg that's above the water. Below the water is a whole other universe, if you will, of planning, of risk assessments, of all uh, anything that you can think of to go wrong. It's been tabletopped, it's been mapped out, it's been scoped out so that by the time you're with that principal, any eventuality has been thought of. So that's kind of a side note. But if your goal is to eventually get into executive protection, then take everything I'm telling you and 10x it, right? Because you need to be able to have a very specific skill set, because people with money want the best when they are paying for protection. So it's not anything you can bullshit your way into. It's not anything that you're not going to happen on one of those jobs. Now, getting back to regular type certifications, any certification that you can get that will help you do your job better and demonstrate to a prospective employer that you are a professional and that you take your job very seriously is going to help you. Now, the other thing is you may be able to use that as a bargaining chip to make more money. If a security company is advertising that they start at, say, $20 an hour, you know, if you're desperate for work, you're looking for work, go to the interview and say, hey, I see that um, you're starting at $20 an hour, but I have to ask, do you pay according to experience and education? And if they say yes, now you have a bargaining chip, because you can say, well, awesome, because I have these certifications or I have this education, and then see what happens, see where they're able to bump you up to. If they say, sorry, we start everybody out at the same rate, still let them know that you have these certifications or whatever. Just let them know, hey, I got to think about it, and then um, finish the interview professionally. And if they do end up calling you in a day or two to offer you the job, just say, hey, I would just like to ask if you would give any other reconsideration and maybe starting out a little bit higher rate. I have these certifications, I paid for this training, and I deserve a little more money. And then that's their last chance to say, yeah, you know what? Let me talk to my boss. Let me see what we can do. Or they're going to say, hey, sorry, man. This it is what it is. So at that point, you have a choice to make. Do you take the lower amount, or do you keep on looking for a higher amount? And I will tell you guys, and I say this all the time: do not take a job for less than $30 an hour. These guys that are out here working these jobs, these security jobs for 12 and 13 and $14 an hour, guys, stop doing that, because what you're doing is you're when you accept a job for less pay than you're worth, you're signaling to these companies that they don't have to pay more. And security is rough work, man. Security guards get shot all the time. Security officers get killed all the time. Not to mention um, severely injured on the job all the time, right? You don't always hear about it unless you're in this space, but this stuff happens all the time. And you have to ask yourself, at what dollar amount are you willing to put yourself in harm's way? And we're going to talk about types of security here in just a second. So, so when you get these certifications, try to use this as a bargaining chip. And you may have to interview 10 times before you find a company that will recognize your certifications and value that and pay you accordingly. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about types of security jobs, and then we're going to talk about some other organizations that you should think about becoming a member of to help you. So, types of security jobs. Obviously, you have your your office building security. A security officer may be posted at the front door, maybe like an information desk security slash concierge person who does double duty. They can tell you what floor the dentist office is on, but they're also the first line of defense should something go sideways in the lobby. You've got your construction type security, where you might be on a construction site, both while it's going on or just after hours, just making sure that people aren't stealing equipment, or squatting in buildings and stuff like that are being built. Um, you have your vehicle type security, where you might be in a vehicle, patrolling parking lots. Maybe you're bouncing between several properties. For instance, in downtown Detroit, Dan Gilbert owns quite a few buildings down there. So he has a security team at each building, and then he's got rovers and supervisors that bounce between the different properties just to make sure everything's going good. Um, and then you have nightclub security. Now, I've trained some bouncers, or nightclub security guys, and guys and gals. And I got to tell you, it's not my first choice. Have I done security in nightclubs? Yes, I did bounce back in the day. Actually, while I was a corrections officer, I was moonlighting as a bouncer for a while. Um, and I've been on a couple security gigs as an executive protection agent, um, with a client who, for whatever reason, is going to a nightclub. So obviously, in an EP role, you go wherever the client goes. But it's not my first choice. Like, I'm never going to be the guy that's just, and not to take away from people who are doing that work. It's just not me. The risk to pay ratio is just, it doesn't make sense to me. Guys and gals that are working at these nightclubs, you guys need to be making, you know, 50, 60, $70 an hour, in my opinion, because the chances of you going hands on are a lot higher than that security guard that's sitting at an information desk in an office building. So the cost to benefit ratio has to be right. But so you have those kinds. So those, I don't do, like, I'm never going to be a nightclub security guy. Again, sports venues and stuff like that, I'm not going to ever be in any of these venues, unless, as an executive protection agent, my client is there either because they're attending something, or they may actually be putting on something. So obviously, in that sense, then yeah, I'll be there, but I'm not working for that venue. Like, I'm never going to work for Little Caesars Arena or Ford Field. The only capacity I could ever see myself working there is as the director of security, and that would be it. Nothing less than that. So you have to pick wisely. the type of security jobs you're going to do, the kind of sites you want to work. Um, the pay should be commensurate with the level of activity. Again, if you're working a site or looking at working at a site where there's a high chance you're going to be going hands-on with people, you need to be compensated as such. At least get them to start you off a little bit higher. So how do you do that? That's where your certifications come in. Now you're justifying why you're asking to come in at a higher rate. Now there are limitations to that, and the limitations are the contract itself. When when businesses are looking for security companies, they may put the job out to bid, and then all the security companies that are interested will bid on the job. And what they're bidding for is hours, right? They're going to come in and they're going to bid, you know, ABC Security Company is going to tell Acme, you know, production company that they can provide top-notch security for $50 an hour, right? That's the bill rate. So let's say the company Acme Production says, okay, I'm going to go with ABC Security Company. The contract is going to be for $50 per hour per officer, and then the company's going to pay the officer from that. And so if the bill rates say $50 and you're getting paid $30, well, the company's profit is $20 per hour per guard. And because of that, they may factor in a raise, if you will. The security company itself may say to itself, with this $20, um, you know, we're going to give a 50-cent raise every 6 months for the first 3 years, or maybe, it's something to that effect. But then again, it may not. They may say, my profit margin is $20. I have to have $20 because I got to pay for rent for this office. I got to pay to have the lights on. I got to buy uniforms. I got to, pay for training if they are training you. So just realize that you're not going to get traditional raises all the time on a lot of these security contracts, especially if you are working for a vendor. Like Allied Universal is a vendor, Pinkerton is a vendor, right? Now, if you are able to get on in-house security somewhere, for instance, like Ford or GM or whatever, now you're an employee of that company. Your pay rate is obviously still going to be different than the guy that's putting the carburetor on a freaking car. Do they still do carburetors on engines now? Anyways, so let's say you go to work for Ford and you're working as part of the Ford security team. You are a Ford employee. You're going to get your benefits. You're going to get that employee discount on cars. The same thing any other employee gets. It's just whatever your hourly rate is going to be different, right? Because everybody's job is different. Then you'll get some raises. That's usually how that goes. Obviously, if you're a contractor working 1099, the rate is what it is. Now you can negotiate a higher rate because now you're a 1099 guy and you're not paying taxes and all that kind of stuff. And I've done that a bunch of times. Somebody will say, hey, I really need you to go work on this detail over here. And I'll say, what's it paying? Oh, it's paying 30. Okay, that's a start. 30 will get me out of bed. But if there's any kind of a threat, like they're like, oh yeah, people have been vandalizing this place, or they've been threatened in some way. Now I've got some leverage to say, oh, so you normally pay $30 an hour for this kind of gig, but because you just told me, that there's a chance there's going to be an issue, how about I get 35 an hour? And they're going to hem and haw because now what am I asking? I'm asking them to cut into their profit. But they got a choice. They can either say, yep, I really need you. You're the guy for the job. I'm willing to pay you extra $5 an hour. Or they're just going to say, nope, I can't do it. And, as a security professional at that point, you just have to pick and choose and decide if it's worth it for you or not. Okay. So there's that. It's really pretty much everything when it comes to the training and all that. The ideal here is you want to position yourself to be able to sell yourself, because at the end of the day, whether you're working security or you're selling cars or whatever you're doing, You want to make the most amount of money in the least amount of time, right? You want to be able to position yourself. And if you can also think of it as a way to climb the ladder, if you will. So at the very bottom in the security game is that observe and report, that unarmed job where you're sitting at a desk. Maybe you're checking IDs or issuing visitor passes, not hard work, right? Answering phones. But then up from that is maybe you go to either a different set of responsibilities at the same site. So maybe you start off as an unarmed kind of observe and report kind of person. And then let's say the next rung on the ladder is now being armed. You've been there for however long, you've demonstrated that you're a responsible professional. Um, and now the next step is to start carrying a gun professionally, right? So you go from that, and then maybe you start going to some more high profile sites. So maybe instead of an office building, maybe you get a job at a nuclear power plant, or maybe you're at Great Lakes Water Authority. Infrastructure. These kind of jobs are more important, and because they're more important and vital sites, um, the pay goes up and the training goes up. So and then probably the cream of the crop for most people, if you ask them in the security space, will be executive protection, right? Which is a whole nother deal, and I'll do other videos on that. But hopefully, this gave you guys something to think about. Um, if you are somebody that's serious about working in security, and before I finish that thought, there is money to be made in security, but just like any other field, you got to start somewhere, and you're not going to make the kind of money you want to make. You're not going to be at the kind of site you want to work. Hell, you're not even going to be working the shifts you want to work. One thing you got to be willing to understand is that when you come into the security field, especially when you go to a particular place, you're going to get the shifts nobody wants. You're going to work the days nobody wants to work, and you're probably going to work the holidays. And I don't care if you're working security at Kmart. Kmart, is it still Kmart? If you're working security at a store, or if you are a newbie on the police department, you just got out of the academy. That's how these things work. You're not going to walk into a security gig unless the business is set up for Monday through Friday. It's not open on the weekends, and it's only day shift. I mean, there are gigs like that. But if you're working at a gig that has shifts, multiple people, the business runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're not going to walk into what we call banker's hours, which is Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. It's just not going to happen. Now, you walk in the door, maybe you have to take, swing shift, but it's not forever, right? You got to start somewhere, get the job, show up to work, look presentable, look like you care about yourself, look like a professional, do your job. And then before you know it, you will be able to move up to that morning shift that you want. You may be able to not have to work weekends because turnover in security is very high. So the guy that has the shift you want may not even be there in 3 months. So you see what I'm saying? So you got to start somewhere. You got to do kind of the shit that nobody else wants to do. And that's on any job. I don't care what kind of job you go to. The new guys always get the worst details. The new guys get the worst positions. But that's the cost of business, right? You start at the bottom, you work your way up, keep your eyes open for other opportunities, and don't make enemies of your supervisors. And as a supervisor, I could tell you the thing that will piss me off the most is guys that can't come to work and guys that don't do shit when they're at work. Like when you said in that interview and they said, hey, you may have to work nights, weekends, and holidays. Is that okay? And you nodded your head and you said yes. So that's the expectation. So as a supervisor, when I got a guy that constantly is calling off work or is constantly late and is never doing the job, I'm not going to give you a good reference when you move on to something that you feel is bigger and better. It's just not going to happen. And even still, if you have those terrible habits and you've been able to muddle your way through your first couple of security jobs because you want to be a police officer or you want to be a border patrol agent or whatever it is, if you've got terrible work ethic to begin with, even if you can fake your way through an academy and get on the job, you're the same person. and those same habits are going to start to creep up, and then they're going to regret hiring you, and they're going to get rid of you quick. So I say all this stuff to just say that if security is something you want to do, you can make good money at security. You really can. But you got to set that foundation. You got to build those building blocks, get those skills, and be good at them. All right, everybody, that's all I got for this video. Nobody jumped on the live, and that's okay. Again, because this video is going to live on this channel until I either delete it or they take it down. So if you run across this video and you feel like you've gotten some benefit out of it, please give me a thumbs up. I am looking to grow the channel. I do have a private security Facebook group. I'm looking to grow that as well. So if you're somebody who's in the security field or in law enforcement, you're more than welcome to join. Just get a hold of me. I'd be happy to have you in. Other than that, guys, when you're out on these details, look like a professional, act like a professional, but most importantly, stay safe. All right, everybody. I'll see you next time.